Everyone, good evening. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So it is lovely that people are logged on for our book launch. So I'm Natasha, and we as Women Ed are supporting a book launch for Samina Chowdhury. Obviously Samina was one of the co-founders of Women Ed, and so we are in full support of this book launch for her new book. So, author Samina Chowdhury is the founder of Equitable Education. She is runs an educational consultancy specialist, and she mainly focuses on attainment gaps. That's her specialist, but obviously all-round overall amazing knowledge and education. Like I've said, she was one of the co-founders of Women Ed, a grassroots movement for connecting existing and inspiring women leaders in education. She has been a teacher, a lecturer, IT tutor. She is also a trained Ofsted inspector and works for a number of local authorities as well. So has been in education for a number of years and has now turned her hand at writing books. So just as, you know, a lovely snippet here, Equitable Education is her first of, I hope, many books that she's going to write in the future. No pressure. And yeah, so handing over then. Amazing, so excited to be here, so excited that everybody's here, and we've got lots of people speaking who have read the text, and we obviously have the chats going as well over the side, so we would like you to enter any questions into there, and yeah, let's get going.
Brilliant. So on to our first guest this evening. Hello everyone, it's fantastic to see so many people here already, and yeah, please do join the conversation, get onto Twitter and tweet, but we're really pleased to be involved in this as Women Ed. Obviously Samina has a close connection with Women Ed, having been a founding member, but first of all I'm going to pass you on to Julia Morris, who is from Critical Publishing. This is the publishing house that published the book, and chosen specifically for the reason, well, I'm sure she'll explain why, that Samina chose them specifically as the publishing house. So over to you, Julia.
Thank you so much, and good evening, everyone. It's just amazing to see so many people here, and thank you for joining us. So I'm Julia Morris. I'm co-founder and director of Critical Publishing, responsible, among other things, for our education list. So I wanted to give you just a little bit of background about the book. I first approached Samina, I think it was in 2017, if my memory serves me right, some time ago. And we met in Sheffield and we shared coffee and ideas. I think I might have had some cake as well, possibly. And Samina, I was just delighted when Samina agreed to put together a proposal for the book. Putting her trust in a small independent publisher, very much in line with her beliefs about equal opportunities, and also a publishing house run by two women. And I think Samina and I at the time both felt that this was going to be an incredibly important text. A few things got in the way, and there were a few sort of personal things going on for Samina and a few sort of delays, but we kept in touch. And last year, a wonderful surprise package arrived in my inbox, which was the finished script. So I was just over the moon. And in a way, I think some of those delays were a bit fortuitous for us, because although this book has always been an important one to write, I think now it's an even more crucial time for publishing this book in the wake of the first lockdown, and with the heightened focus on social disadvantage due to the pandemic. So hopefully many of you have had a chance to look at the book, or will soon do so. You'll see that not only does it give an unflinching and evidence-based picture of the reality of the attainment gap, it also provides some really practical advice, suggestions for resources, examples of good practice for teachers and indeed anyone involved in education, to really encourage and support pupils from all backgrounds. We were lucky enough to have lots of people who pre-read the book, and have been really generous in their praise for it. Just to give you a flavour of the reactions we've had, I've got a couple of quotes from those who can't be with us tonight. So firstly, Mel Ainscow, Emeritus Professor of Education at the University of Manchester. This is what Mel had to say. In this engaging and inspirational book, Samina Chowdhury draws on her massive experience of promoting inclusion and equity in education over many years. Her ideas are both challenging and yet supportive of those in the field who struggle to find ways of responding positively to learner diversity. A particular strength of the book is the way that research findings are combined with the author's professional experience of supporting developments in schools. I have no doubt that her guidance and practical suggestions will be widely welcomed by colleagues in the field. I've also got a quote from Mary Myatt, who I think a lot of you will know as an education advisor and writer. Mary says, "This is a highly readable, wide-ranging book on the factors contributing to the variation in outcomes for groups of pupils. In laying out the contributing factors of underachievement, summarising the research, providing case studies and prompts for action, it points the way for a truly equitable education for all, essential reading for every part of the education sector." And then finally, we were also really lucky to have Sir Tim Brighouse write the foreword for the book. It's fairly long foreword, but just to give you the sort of top and tail of what he had to say, he starts, "There is nothing more important in education than to achieve equity for all children, especially those who through no fault of their own have the odds stacked against their success." And he ends by saying, "This excellent book will undoubtedly enable you to rescue the futures of many more children. Read on, think, learn and act. Let us win what H.G. Wells called the race between education and catastrophe, not just for the individual pupils we teach, but the society we live in." So I hope that gives you a flavour of the sort of reactions that we've had to the book. And I'd just like to really reiterate those sentiments and say how proud Critical Publishing are that we have been involved with this book, and say a huge thank you to Samina for putting her trust in us. Just to sort of finish off things, I've got a couple of bits of housekeeping to tell people about. So I'd like to launch our competition. So 2 lucky people can win a copy of the book. You should all have, I think, a link to Jamboard, which I think has been shared on the chat. And if you go to the second sheet, there are 2 questions there about why you want a copy of the book and how you might use it to improve provision in your setting. If you can ensure that you leave your name and or your Twitter handle, then we'll announce the winners at the end of the launch event. In addition to that, if you want to buy more copies of the book, or if you're not lucky enough to win, we do have a discount code, which is SCHOOL21, and I'll share that in the chat as well when I've done this. And that can be used on the Critical Publishing website until the end of the year to get 20% off titles. So I'd now like to hand over. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Julia, for that. That was a brilliant introduction to the book. And I have to say, I got very excited because when I arrived home today, my copy had arrived. It made its way to Jersey, and I'm very much looking forward to reading it. I mean, I've had a sneak peek, I will be honest. And certainly from the quotes and the comments that you shared there, Julia, it certainly gave me the impression that was very true. The scope and depth of knowledge and experience in your book, Samina, is phenomenal. There is so much wisdom, so much experience, and you know, in terms of what we can learn from it as a profession, it's huge. But you don't need me to say that. I think what we now need to do is bring on our esteemed guests. And I have to say, I'm a little bit in awe of all of these guys. And thank you so much for coming and sharing this book launch with us today. Each of them has something to say, a little comment about Samina's book, and they're going to talk about what they think of the book and how they feel it can be used to promote equitable practices in our schools. And starting us off is Dame Alison Peacock, who's the CEO of the Chartered College. I don't need to really introduce her. I think we all know what a phenomenal, inspiring guests we have with us with Dame Alison Peacock. So over to you.
Thank you so much. So yes, this is absolutely amazing. Thank you. And it reminded me, reading this, of so many children that I've taught over the years. But I just want to talk about one particular child because I've got just yesterday, got some updated news about this particular child. So this child, when I wrote about him, I called him Miles because that was miles away from his real name. And previously when I've written about him, I haven't disclosed, but he's actually an Afro-Caribbean child. And in the light of the BBC documentary just recently, Educationally Subnormal, and in the light of the Sewell report, I thought I would just give you an update about Miles. And I think you will appreciate this, Samina, because there is so much in your book that will show us along the way all the kinds of opportunities when the door could be closed in the face of a child like Miles, or the door can be left open. So this is a lad who I first met when he was 3. He had been taken into emergency foster care, and his foster mother, who was Afro-Caribbean, she lived across the road from the school. She brought him over to meet me and she said, Mrs. Peacock, I would really love to put Miles's name down for nursery. And she was holding his hand, but he was a child who'd been strapped into his pushchair, strapped into his cot. He basically had been abused. He couldn't really walk, he couldn't talk, he wasn't toilet trained, saliva everywhere. And we went and stood in the nursery and he kind of broke away from foster mum's hand and kind of went like this across the nursery, and his eyes were just like, oh my goodness, because there were children and there were toys and there were things that he'd never seen before in his life. And I just turned to mum. I've always been a bit of a rule breaker. And I said, let's bring him into nursery. Now, he wasn't of statutory nursery age. He needed to have someone with him, but I just felt there are times in life when you have to do the right thing. So he came into nursery. He started nursery straight away. So he had a longer period of nursery than he would otherwise have had. He then, at the end of the reception year, was doing well, learning his phonics and so on, but there were so many things. He was obsessed with routines. He got into all kinds of rituals. The classroom was a classroom where people walked through. It was a kind of thoroughfare, and every time anybody walked through the classroom, even HMCI Christine Gilbert, when she came to visit the school, had to be stopped by Miles, and he had a ritual set of questions that he needed to ask, and it was all about, where's your mummy today? How is your mummy? And then when she walked back the other way, the same set of questions. And the reception staff said to me, Alison, we've spoken to foster mum and we've spoken to the educational psychologist, and we really think he needs to move to special school. And so with a heavy heart, I kind of agreed, and he went off to special school. And then in year 5, at the beginning of year 5, before year 5 had begun, the phone rang and it was a special school, and they said to me, hello, Mrs. Peacock, do you remember Miles? Well, he's ready to come back now. And I just remember this little boy in reception, all kind of, you know, and mouthing everything. And I was just like, well, no, he's off, really? And they said, no, we think he is. He's done really well in special school. And so he came back to our school and he remembered some of the children, they remembered him. He got back into the whole kind of being back in mainstream. He went on the school journey with everybody. He took part in the school play. And then at the end of year 6, when we got his SATs results, I was actually at a conference with Carol Dweck when he got his SATs results. And I remember opening an email and seeing the fact that he'd achieved level 5s across the board. And I just remember thinking, oh my goodness, I mean, this is amazing, because he'd come from a beginning where he could hardly speak, and where expectations in many schools would have been so low of this child. Anyway, on my last day of school, as I was leaving to join the Chartered College, I did a big assembly for everybody, and I kind of thought, it's great, I've got away, I haven't cried. And I went into my office, and there on my desk was a letter from Miles. Oh God, it's happening again. Anyway, it was a letter from Miles. Here it is. And I'm not going to read it to you because I will cry, but basically in it, he says, thank you thank you for all the opportunities. And it wasn't me, it was just, there were so many people. The special school was amazing. The teacher, when he came back into year 5, was amazing. His initial reception teacher was amazing. He was amazing, confounding all our expectations. Anyway, he went to secondary school because he was a pupil premium child, because he was looked after. He got to the school down the road that everybody wanted to go to. He did really well. And yesterday, I heard that he's got a place at a Russell Group University to study for his degree. And if that's not an example of what's possible when the education system works in absolute partnership for the best of our children, which is exactly what you talk about in this book, Samina. There were so many agencies along the way, so many teachers along the way, so many opportunities, and family as well, that, you know, that could have stopped him. And yet here he is. So I think this is what your book does. I think your book shows us the art of the possible, and it's practical and it's real and it's wise. And I absolutely recommend it to everybody. It's totally brilliant. Thank you very much, Samina. Thank you for writing it.
Oh, thank you, Alison. That's really so kind. You've got me in tears. I'm trying not to dab my eyes, but I think I'm going to have to. Thank you so much for that really powerful story.
Thank you, Alison. That really was. I think we're all in tears, actually. I think we're all profoundly touched by that story. But you're right in that, you know, the approach that Samina has taken, these practical strategies, and the idea of sharing that equitably with everyone, giving them access to education, that's what makes a difference. I'm going to move on now to our next guest, and this is Professor Alma Harris, a name again that you may well have heard of if you have read any research to do with education. She is Deputy Head of School and Director of Research at Swansea University, and we are very privileged to have her with us today. Over to you, Alma.
Thanks very much. I mean, how do you follow that, Alison? I mean, seriously. And also, I don't have a copy of the book to show to everyone, so I hope, Julia, that will be rectified soon. But I mean, there are miles in every school, I guess. There are young people who, by virtue of no fault of their own, as Tim Brighouse says, have barriers put in front of them. And I think our job as educationists is to take down those barriers and to recognise the barriers when we see them. And I guess this is what the book does. It talks about those barriers. It talks about the opportunities to dismantle some of the things that get in the way of some of our most talented young people. It's a huge privilege to say a few words about this terrific book, and also to reflect, Samina, on the person behind the pages. Having written a fair few books myself, I really do admire you in all sorts of ways. But I think for you, equity is not just a buzzword. It's not just the latest thing. It's your life's work. And therefore I see a huge congruence between the book and you. You don't just write the words, you actually walk the talk. And I think that's so important, and also so clear in the book that you've produced. Your passion for fairness and justice is clear on every page of the book. It leaps out at you. And you also put a spotlight, very importantly, on some of the solutions, because it's so easy to see the problems and the issues, and it's harder to see the solutions. But I think in your pragmatic and very kind way, you point us to some of the things that we can do. In your book, as Alison rightfully says, you don't shy away from the uncomfortable. And some of the messages about equity are uncomfortable, they're difficult, they're challenging. And in COVID times, we've seen equity issues come to the fore, and we can't just look away anymore, and we shouldn't look away anymore. But infused in every page, Samina, is a huge amount of optimism and activism as well. And I think in your role as the co-founder of Women's Ed, some of that optimism and activism shines through, and it's plain to see you bringing agency to this. It doesn't make us 10% braver, it should make us 1,000% braver. This book is a brave book. It covers things that are difficult and uncomfortable, but also so important. Equity is the main barrier in our education systems. You know, controversially, I think PISA can be put to one side and equity should be put centre stage. But your book shines a light really on what is needed and what is possible. And I like that about the book. What is really possible? It's grounded, it's resourceful, and it's direct. But to conclude, any book is only as good as the action that results from it. And I think this book is a catalyst for change. It's a call to action. We know what to do. We know what is possible. We can help young people like Miles. We just need to take down those barriers that stand in their way. Thank you, Samina, for the book, and also for being such a positive force for equity at the time when so many young people need it, and quite frankly, they deserve it. So thank you.
Thank you. I just don't know what to say, and I'm a bit overwhelmed, so I might start crying, so I'll try not to say so. But thank you so much for your really, really kind words. They mean absolute everything to me, so thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Professor Harris. That really was a very powerful statement. I think we're all going to be in tears by the end of this session from the amount of love that's being shared here. But that's so true that you live those values, Samina. There is no doubt about that, and I think that very much comes across in your writing as well. We're moving on now to our next guest. And this is somebody who is close to the Women Ed community as well, Professor Sam Twistleton. And she is Director of Sheffield Institute of Education and Sheffield Hallam University. So over to you, Professor Twistleton, and your comments.
Well, it was bad enough for Alma following on from Alison. I've now got to follow on from Alma. It's just getting worse and worse. I'll bring it right down now. But I do have a book to wave. And it's absolutely brilliant book, and I just wish that we could all be in a room together, sort of celebrating and toasting it. We will soon, Samina, I hope. I'm definitely coming to see you in Doncaster as soon as I possibly can, and it feels like it might be possible sooner rather than later, because it's just such a brilliant book, and I'm just so proud to know you and work with you. You're amazing. As you know, my main sort of focus of interest in my professional life is in beginning and early career teachers. As I think everybody here knows, that's such an important time. That early phase of your teaching career is a really important time, both for you as an individual, but it's actually really important for the profession as well, because how identity is formed during that period sort of determines the character, mission and effectiveness of the teaching profession. And I was really interested in looking at this book through that lens, really, just thinking about what an enormous value it will have for our trainee teachers, our early career teachers. I'm definitely going to be putting it on all our reading lists, because my experience would suggest that 100% of the people that we train to be teachers come into the profession for exactly the reasons that you say in the book yourself. They want to make a difference. They recognise the potential that education has to transform lives. Maybe they feel their own life has been transformed by it, and they come really with that sense of mission and that sense of really wanting to make a difference. What the book does is shine a light on what can be quite a naive sort of set of propositions that people come into the profession with, and make them realise the extent to which so many children in the education system do actually have the odds stacked against them before they even come into school. And that education can be a force for good in terms of mitigating against those odds, but it can actually make them worse as well. And I love the way that you don't hold back from sort of challenging us on that. And also what you say about equity and excellence too often in our system being defined in ways that seem to put them in opposition to each other. So you can either be excellent or you can have equity. And what you do so brilliantly is bring the two together and actually show that you need both, and actually you get excellence through getting equity, and as others have said, by showing all the sort of practical ways in which that's achievable. So you do a brilliant job of comprehensively busting that myth, which I think is still quite prevalent in lots of discussions I'm involved in, and show how the opposite is true, and with an evidence base for it as well. And what that means for early career teachers, I think, is by using the book, using the discussions in it, using the themes that you explore, it is that we are kind of exposing them to a massively important discussion right at the point where their identity is being formed, and a really foundational point in their career, which I think can have a truly transformational impact on them, so that they can have a truly transformational impact on the children that they'll be teaching. I know from my own personal research that identity formation at the start of your journey as a teacher is really fundamentally important. It's where your values are created, your way of being, your way of thinking about you in relation to the children that you're responsible for, but the community that you serve as well, which I think comes across so strongly in the book. And as I said, we will definitely be recommending it to all our trainee teachers. There's also, I think, a lot for us to think about as a university. I mean, you've come and you've talked to us a few times about what we can do about the fact we're not attracting enough people with enough diversity into the profession through initial teacher training. We've had brilliant discussions. You've given loads of practical advice. I'd love to say, yeah, now we've cracked it, and we certainly haven't. There's so much more to do. And it's made me think again, we've got to really continue to work on this as a priority, because if the profession doesn't reflect the diversity of the community it serves, it can't possibly, achieve what you're looking for us to achieve in this text. So I've said a lot about the sort of philosophical, social and ethical reasons why I think it's such a brilliant book. But I am essentially a really practical person, almost too pragmatic sometimes. But that's another reason why I love the book, as others have said. You don't shy away from tackling sort of really difficult issues, but then you give us some really straightforward, practical, actionable things that we can do in our own practice to address them. And I think that's what I've been missing at key points in my career. I talked about identity formation. My own PGC was brilliant in so many ways. It gave me some really strong values and beliefs, but where it really fell down, I think, was helping me to translate those big picture sets of things that you're trying to achieve into, well, what does this mean in this moment, in this decision I'm making in my practice right now? And you break it down into that level of practical detail, and that's exactly what you need. I think that there's been a gap for me there that this is absolutely filled. So I actually think, I'm trying not to be too prone to exaggeration, but I really do believe it's one of the most important books that I've seen published for a while, because it has that fantastic combination of the sort of social, ethical, philosophical framework, but with really, really actionable things that people at every level can do to address the issues that you raise. So well done, Selina. I'm so proud to know you.
Oh, thank you. And I can't wait to have that hug in person and a coffee very soon.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Professor Twistleton. I think that is absolutely one of the real strengths of the book, is the practical solutions that are offered, and clear diagrams. It brings that level of research right down and actually makes it so much more accessible. And absolutely, this should be a book for every entry-level teacher. Everyone should read this book without a doubt. On to our final guests then. And this is Professor Damien Page, who is Dean of School at the Carnegie School of Education. So another one who has care of young kind of novice teachers, I suppose, at Leeds Beckett University. So over to you, Professor Page. Your thoughts on Semina's book, please.
I mean, last I'm just going to plagiarise everyone who's come before me, as all good academics should at some point. In the forward, I wrote about Semina's book, cutting through the noise that's generated around diversity and inclusion. And there's three types of noise, really. There's the noise of presenteeism, where everyone thinks they have to say that they champion inclusive approaches, and everyone does. And if you look at Twitter, of course, everyone champions it. But a lot of people then lack the bravery to actually take the actions that are needed to properly implement inclusion. You've got the omnipresent noise from the right, and the kind of hysteria around CR, critical race theory, for example, and trans issues, whatever it happens to be, that there's a rejection of theory that Semina doesn't shy away from. And then there's the kind of noise that we generate ourselves around this kind of work, the work that requires us to take a real serious look at what we do and our practice, and challenge ourselves and see how we can actually, move things forward in a very practical way. And this book for me cuts through all of that noise in a way that many others don't. And there's so many books written on this kind of thing. It's kind of turned into an industry. And there's some careers being made of it, but this isn't a book that's about that. It's better than that. It doesn't get taken in by the kind of discourse that focuses around white working class boys, which is a far more palatable example of inclusion that, you know, a lot of people prefer to talk about that rather than address the issues of underattainment of children of colour, for example. I like the fact it's research informed, it's historically situated, but it's not distant from practice. And I think that, again, separates it from a lot of the books that are out there at the moment. So there's a clear emphasis on the application of theory and a real solid implementation of what works. And as many others have said, I love the kind of personal experience that Samina brings to it. To blend the historical, the theory, and the personal, it takes skill. And it's good to see that throughout. The case studies are really strong. You know, you would be able to tell from my accent, I'm not a northerner, but working in the north, and you know, we go around to rural schools where there might be one children of colour, for example, in an entire primary school out in rural settings. So the case studies are really useful for settings that don't currently have a diversity but want to prepare. They want to prepare the ground and understand different cultures and education experiences beyond their own personal views. I think central again are the points for reflection. I like that. It cuts through the noise that we create ourselves. It gets asked us to challenge our practices and challenges the kind of actions that we take on a daily basis, but also the way that those of us who are in leadership positions need to think strategically about this. So it's everything from strategy to the daily experiences. And finally, for me, there's two things that are throughout this book that are essential for inclusive practice: hope and ambition. With Samina's writing, there's the hope that the vast majority of educators do want to do the right thing. Teachers do generally, most of them, want to create inclusive environments. They want to address the attainment gap. But also calls teachers and schools and asks them to be ambitious. And I think, again, that's lacking in a lot of books that I've read recently, to move beyond the kind of lip service and the performativity of inclusive practice and really implement strategies that will actually meet the needs of all children. And for that, I salute you. I think it's a great book, and yeah, I'm happy to add my voice to it.
Thank you, Damien, and also for all your considerable practical support that you've always given. I know that I can always go to you and you will make things happen. So thank you so much for that as well.
Brilliant, thank you. I love those words, hope and ambition. I think they summarise what we all aspire to have in education. And there is certainly that hope in this book, because there is a real sense of that feeling of what we can achieve if we strive to make it happen. And that's really, really powerful. So thank you to all of our guests who've spoken. I could just pull together some of their thoughts that, you know, Samina she lives her values, that the book reflects that, that there are practical, pragmatic solutions within the book. And it's meaningful and it's powerful, and it's powerful to those at entry level in teaching, but also to leaders who need to think strategically about how we introduce diversity and inclusion and actually make education equitable. I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Natasha Hilton now, who is now going to do the next section of this.
Thank you, Palm. And Samina, I feel like I've been through an emotional roller coaster in this session. I can only imagine how you're feeling. I feel so proud to know you. Can I just say, like,
oh, thank you.
Just hearing like so many esteemed people talking about you and just being proud to know you as well. It's just amazing. And yeah, just people have spoken not highly about your book, but just about you as a person and what you stand for. And that, I think, I mean, you know, you introduced me to Women Ed. You were the person that kind of were really inspirational to me, but then to just hear so many other people speak about you and what you're about and what you stand for is just a significant reflection of you. And I know it must just be a bit overwhelming, but yeah, it's just, I'm so proud of you, honestly.
Oh,
so I just want to kind of go into ask some questions. So in the chats has been ridiculously active, and we have lots of questions there from people. I've seen a couple of questions from Jill Berry, and I know that Liz will later on go into those. But I have a couple of questions to ask you, if you don't mind. So obviously we spoke in the very beginning, before actually everybody was live, and we were just talking about the book and how it came about and how long it's taken you to write the book. And you've obviously had lots of input into loads of blogs and loads of other people's books and sections in there, but you decided to go and write your own book. And equitable education is something that I know has taken you a while, but why did you decide that actually this was the time and this was the time to write this?
I have been thinking about writing it for about 10 years, but I think Julia was the one. So I was quite clear in my mind. I could, when I spoke to Julia, I could tell her already what I wanted to do. So I think it was just a meeting of minds that came together. But the real reason I wanted to write it is because I think too many voices of children and young people are not heard. And I think over the past 10 years, you know, Damien talked about the sort of narrative becoming very binary, and I think this has been a national government led, just talking about particular groups of pupils, when I know from my work in schools that it's much more complex, much more nuanced. And I think it was unfair, not only for the children and young people, but for teachers not to be given the resource that they needed. So it was an attempt to shift some of the dialogue that was taking place nationally. And it was an also opportune moment because I'm coming towards the end of my career in the way, you know, I've had a very fulfilling and fortunate career, but I thought it would be really good to pass on some of that knowledge and expertise and understanding that I had gained through having the absolute privilege of working with hundreds and hundreds of schools. I know it sounds a real exaggeration, but I've been very fortunate. I've worked in 4 local authorities and I've worked cross-sector as well. So I think what it's enabled me to do is really crystallize some of the issues that I've found, and that's why each chapter talks about the issues as well as some of the potential solutions. And hopefully, as Sam has spoken, you know, to be able to pass on that knowledge so that, you know, particularly trainee teachers, but also, Sam, you know, I come across lots of head teachers who haven't sadly had the opportunity to really engage with some of these issues. And I've certainly found in Doncaster, where I work, that there's been an absolutely overwhelming appetite from leaders to really find out more. So I think it's trying to cover the whole spectrum, but also give people enough knowledge and understanding and expertise that I've gained from the privileged position that I've had, but also tried to make it accessible. That was the reason why I primarily wrote it. But ultimately, we do want it to impact on those children that they do need a better deal out of our education system at the moment. And this will hopefully go some way to be able to do that.
Do you know, as I've read it myself and just hearing both professors there speaking, I wish it was something that I'd had when I was in university. I didn't have any access to anything as practical and easy to read. You know, that's what it feels like, an easy read. It's not difficult, it's not challenging, it's not something that you sit there going, oh, what does that mean? I'm confused. There's no confusion. There's real clarity. And so, no, I think, you know, it's something that so many people are going to have more access than you could ever imagine, actually. You know, it's a book that I'll be recommended to teachers in my school that are established teachers that have been around the block, as you say, that, you know, really is, you know, an amazing book, honestly. And I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit right now, to be fair. So, you know, everybody that's read it has been like highly praised the book highly, have spoken about, you know, what they'd be doing with the book. But you tell us, how would you like it to be used? What was the intention when you wrote it? How would you like it to be used, and whom, by whom? Who would you like to use this book?
Well, I know this sounds really, you know, having absolutely high expectations, but the title is Equitable Education, what every person working in education should know about closing the attainment gap for all pupils. So ideally, I would want every teacher and every leader to be aware of the contents of that book and really use it as professional development for their own staff based on their context, because the way I've hopefully written the book is that there are key chapters that everybody should read, but then you can dip in and pick out what you need, and then when you read other chapters you can see how the intersectionality comes across. So ideally I would want most people working in education, and that's also including support staff as well, because we know that a lot of support staffs are the ones that are given the responsibility for teaching some of the children that I mentioned, and they need to be, you know, well trained, as well as mainstream teachers, or, you know, pupils having access to quality first teaching. So why isn't it that sometimes teacher assistants are teaching certain groups of children and the actual teacher is teaching, you know, these people? So I would want anyone really working in education to feel that, you know, they can access the book. And on purpose, it was quite hard for me to write, in the sense that I think Jill asked a question in the chat, you know, what did I find the most difficult? It was actually I knew too much, so trying to just crystallize the main bits and to write it in an accessible manner was the hardest bit that I found. The easy bit was really in terms of, I think, the leadership, and I'm going to give credit to Alma, because Alma's book that had come out probably about 18 months before writing my book, I think that helped me crystallize some of my thinking around leadership and the importance of leadership. So the chapter that I, you know, wrote around leadership was probably the one that I found the easiest to write, but the other ones were quite difficult. So I've gone off and brought in some of the other comments, but I hope that's answered your question, Tasha.
No, absolutely. And you know what you're saying there about the fact that when we're in schools and you do have support staff supporting children that are most probably need the teacher the most, is actually, you know, is actually what we see in most schools. And actually we need to educate everybody. And like you've said, the book is so accessible that you don't have to have done a degree or master's or whatever in education, because everybody can read this and see how practical it is. And I'm going through the chats, and, you know, Raj has just said, you know, her son's just completed a PGCE. Like, that's, I don't know, that's going to be his birthday present or something, but, you know, it's there, and that's how I see it as well. It's definitely, you know, for the new, but also for existing, and for people that are not necessarily a qualified teacher, anybody in schools. And I completely agree with that. And, you know, I don't think you're thinking too big. I think everybody that's, you know, has any contact with children, especially in an educational environment, should be accessing this book. Absolutely. So no pressure. However, I already feel that this is doing really, really well. We know, you know, how it's looking on Amazon already, you know, and where are you going? What does the future hold? Like, what are your plans?
Well, I think I've already mentioned that I'm getting towards the twilight of my career in terms of how I've done, you know, how in terms of my particular role. So I do have a few more years, but what I want to do is really set up some sort of charity or support children's education abroad, particularly young girls. I feel really passionate that you know, I'm very fortunate that I've had a very good education system myself. My children have. Hopefully I've helped children and young people in the schools that I've worked with, as well as through my own teaching. But what I really want to do is use some of the money that I will make out of the book. I know it's not going to be a lot, because that's the nature of the work that we do, but certainly the consultancy, and use the funding from that. So that was the other driver for writing the book, to make it self-sustained, so I can set up a consultancy and use the funding from the consultancy to be able to support children's education abroad. So do my little bit, you know, hopefully improve children and young people's outcomes in England, but also take that little bit further and use my time in a more sort of charitable manner to reach out to other young people as well, and try to enable them to have a decent education, because there's too many, you know, millions and millions of children, and particularly as a result of COVID, will not now be even getting basic education. And I think in the society that we have, there's enough wealth for us to give to everyone, and I think that's something I'd like to do in my own small way.
Okay, you're making us all cry now. Oh, and can you see why people speak so highly of you? Because, you know, you're just a lovely person. And I can't even explain it in any other way. Honestly, Samina, like, you're so inspirational, and all of the work you're doing is just like, it touches everybody. So thank you so much. I still have questions. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get them out now. Okay, so Vivian, would you like to ask a question? So we can all recover a little bit here. Vivian's here, Samina. Would you mind if she pops in and asks a question? Is that all right?
Of course, I'll try, yeah.
Well, first of all, I wanted to say you are just a spring chicken in comparison, Samina. So you've got loads of time, absolutely loads of time. And I wanted to congratulate you so much, because I can actually remember the very first Women Ed, the second Women Ed on conference, when we were in Reading. You and I had a long conversation during one of the sessions about what you wanted to write about and what you wanted to do. And it's so wonderful to see it come to fruition. And Women Ed will certainly donate to that charity, Samina. But I wanted to ask a slightly broader question, because obviously you had a chapter around BME colleagues in 10% Braver, Women Ed's first book. And one of the reasons we wrote the book, in fact, one of the reasons we were on Twitter, was so more of women's voices would be heard. And it's lovely to be here with other female authors as well, including Alma. Hello, Alma. Alma, lovely to see you. Alma and I used to work together. I wondered, Samina, if you thought that what we did in 10% Braver and what you are doing now, is that encouraging more and more women to write and share the voices and their expertise?
I hope it does. And you know, obviously I can't say because we have to speak to the women themselves, but I think through the work that we certainly did in Women Ed and the 2 books, obviously, and I think having the opportunity to write chapters with the support of colleagues within Women Ed and otherwise has certainly been a positive move going forward. I know certainly, you know, people like Sue Cowley, Jill Berry, lots of other colleagues, and obviously all the colleagues here have been very supportive of my work and Women Ed generally as an organisation. I mean, as soon as I mentioned, can we have a joint, it seemed a natural place to go, to come back to, you know, Women Ed, to say, can we have the launch event together? Because I couldn't imagine celebrating a success without, you know, the people that I really care about, and I know that they care about me. So having that opportunity to write, you know, blogs, write chapters in books, I hope that has encouraged other women who may be thinking of writing that, no, actually I can do that. It's not as you know, as hard as potentially, you know, perceive. And I certainly feel that Women Ed really gave me a voice through writing articles for Schools Week and for, you know, the Times Educational Supplement, which is another way to start. So I do hope that our work in Women Ed and actually organisations like BAME Ed are actually giving more people, whether it's, you know, women or whether it's BME background, you know, colleagues, the opportunity to write and have their voice heard. I mean, the contents of my book in many ways really going against the grain nationally and going against what people perceive to be the issues, but I wanted to be true to myself and write down what I knew were still issues and what I could see still needed addressing in school. So I think, you know, that's the authenticity that we would want from writers that are possibly not writing at the moment, to be able to bring a different perspective and write about things that are close to their heart that possibly is not in the public domain at the moment. And that was one of the reasons that I really wanted to work for you know, work with Julia in terms of critical publishing. It was the fact that it's a small publishing house, you know, run by 2 dynamic women that were very much in line with my values. That was the decision. I didn't regret that. You know, I didn't even think about going with anybody else. So I do hope it does encourage lots more women, and also lots of you know, BME colleagues to think, well, I've got a book in me, I really want to write about those experiences and support other colleagues along the way as well.
Oh, thank you, Samina. And also for women to write in a brave way, as you have, as you've just said, about your book. And certainly in 10% Braver, we were pretty brave about some of the issues we were raising, which now seem to become part of the conversation. So yeah, I hope all that we all do is just encourages more women to write in any way, because we still need to hear the voices of very many more women in education. And I just, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, Vivian, and also that I think there is a really good support structure now to be able to coach, mentor, you know, colleagues who are wanting to do that, rather than just feeling they've got to do it by themselves. You know, having that network of support is really, really important.
We've just done a super thing, or it's being done at the moment, where we partnered with Innovate Journal, and we've got 17 articles in the next edition coming out. And after that, Alma, I promise we'll get back to you, because Alma's offered us a women-ed edition of School Leadership and Management. So that will be the next job when Innovate Journal comes out. And all of these opportunities, and including writing your own book, I think you are blazing the trail there for us, Samina. And I couldn't think of a better person to do that. Thanks, Natasha.
Thank you. Thanks, Vivian. Thanks for jumping in there. And that was actually almost the last question I was going to be asking anyway, so it fit in perfectly. So to kind of, we are coming towards the end. So I just want to remind people though, just before we get Liz to kind of wrap up and ask any questions that were in the chats. If you're on Twitter, can you just make sure you're using the hashtags for Equitable Ed and Women Ed as well, please. Liz is going to round up with just kind of summary of what's in the chats, and then Julia will be announcing the winner of the book before we have Palm finishing up, I think.
I think everyone will be waiting with bated breath. No one will listen to anything that I say. Anyway, Switzerland calling. Enough said after the weekend. But anyway, moving on. So, Samina, questions from people in the chat. I think the first thing that's come up, more than questions actually, is what Vivian was saying about being a trailblazer and about working towards and leading the way for so many other members of our community. If you look through the chat later, which you must, you'll see so many people have contributed and said that's more than anything else, is what difference you've already made and what difference you continue to make. But I have got some questions for you. So here we are, quick fire questions. Jill Berry, love you, Jill. Jill asked, which sections of the book did you find most challenging to write, and which ones are you most proud of?
I think I've already said that the leadership chapter was probably the easiest one for me to write. I did find that there were lots of things that I couldn't fit into the chapters. So there is another chapter that's called Bringing It All Together. So that one is sort of bringing a whole range of other issues that I felt were impacting on, you know, the attainment gap that I put in. So that was probably the hardest one to write, in the sense that it was trying to give it some sort of thread to, because there wasn't a common theme there, but tried to make it a common theme. I think generally though, writing it, I didn't write it sequentially. I did write certain chapters at certain times because they just seemed pertinent. And sometimes it was more painful than others. Sometimes, you know, you could write a whole chapter and you felt, oh, that flowed really well. And at other times it was really damn hard. And you just think, oh God, I'll give up on that and come back to it. But that's the nature of writing.
I have another question for you from Fazia Ahmed that says, I have a question for Samina. Teaching in higher education, it's great to see more students from Black and ethnic minority backgrounds entering higher education. However, we know that students are already structurally disadvantaged when they enter higher education, but unfortunately the experience seems to be increasing the attainment gap. What can we do to address this beyond diversifying our reading lists, etc.? Thank you.
I think this is something that higher education institutions really need to work more closely with schools and providers. And I think it's really interesting. I don't actually have enough there's not enough evidence in the public domain, but for example, you know, one of the success stories that we often hear around is Bangladeshi pupils' attainment has been really, you know, increased rapidly. But I was looking at some A-level data, and actually when you start looking at the A-level data, it's not as positive. So I think there is quite a lot of work that actually still needs to be done in schools by higher education providers to make sure that they are, you know, reaching out and supporting pupils, as well as looking holistically. Because one of the things I talk about, you know, a lot of BME students, for example, or children with English as additional language have lots of skills that aren't recognised by schools. For example, language skills, or they may be studying, you know, lots of other things in the community, but that's not taken into consideration when offers are given, you know, by higher education. So I think it is really about being more open and understanding the communities, and then looking at what they can do. But it's such a vast question to answer without really looking at the specifics of which groups you're talking about.
And one last question for you. Well, Damien talked about hope and ambition, which I thought was really beautiful. What are your hopes and aspirations, Samina, for both the UK and across the world?
Well, in terms of the UK, I hope that we could change that. You know, as I've said to you already, the narrative at the moment, I think it's too narrow in terms of which pupils need that additional support. It's really pits certain groups of pupils against others. I don't think that's helpful, particularly in a post-Brexit world. And I think we really need to start thinking more holistically about the diversity of our pupil population. It's growing significantly, and we can't pretend that we can just teach in one way and expect all children to you know, do extremely well because of the structural inequalities that exist. So I think we need to be honest and open. And I hope if a few teachers take note of what I'm saying and start addressing those needs, you know, in a more nuanced and understand the complexities, and as a result pupils get better attainment outcomes, that will be, you know, something, you know, amazing. In terms of globally, the book is written with an English audience in mind, although the research is applicable. So I would hope, I mean, you never know, Julia, we might be writing books for different, you know, countries and different contexts and using the research, but looking at the nuances and contexts of, you know, particular jurisdictions in different countries. But we haven't really thought that far, have we, at the moment?
That's book 2 coming any moment now. Thank you, Samina. Thank you. It's now book reveal time. Julia, is this you? I'm not sure who's doing this bit. Yes, go, Julia.
Yeah, I think it's me. It's been really difficult to try and keep an eye on Jamboard and just listen, but to the amazing conversations that have been happening. Hopefully, I've managed okay. So the two people I wanted to pick to get free copies of the book are at different ends of the spectrum. So the first is, I think, Megan Kinsey, who is embarking on a PGCSE and at the start of her teaching career, and clearly has, well, just in the few words that she put on Jamboard, her passion came through. So that was my first selection. And then the other person is Caroline Earle, who has been a teacher for over 20 years. And despite that, her excitement and sort of desire to use the book really sort of shone through in her answer. So those were my 2 selections.
Fantastic. Yay, congratulations to those 2 winners of the book.
Just on a practical level there, I'll need postal addresses for those 2 people, but I can, perhaps they can message Women Ed with those. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. I can put,
okay.
Somebody can pop the email address into the chat. That would be. Or
you can just DM me on Equitable, you know, at Equitable Ed Twitter handle, and then I can pass it on.
Lovely. Thanks, Samina.
Thank you. So we're at the end of this incredibly heartwarming event this evening. It's been, there are so many times where I just wanted to cry and sob, because there's just so much love for you, Samina, for what you're doing. You clearly had such huge impact on the people around you, the people you've worked with, but also through this book now, which is so much more profound than we could hope. So thank you, first of all, to all our guests who've joined us this evening. Thank you to Julia from Critical Publishing. It's been brilliant having you involved in this event, and also for the freebies, which is always great. Thank you to our esteemed guests, Dame Alison Peacock, Professor Alma Harris, Professor Sam Twistleton, and Professor Damien Page, all adding and contributing so much to this this event in terms of your thoughts on the book. There are 2 events that are coming up, actually, that we've kind of tied in with this as a bit of a follow-up to keep the conversation going around equitable education, which, you know, clearly is such an important book for schools and for teachers and for anyone involved in education. The first is the book club, the Women Ed Book Club chat. So we're going to, well, Samina's going to be going live with Kieran, talking in conversation about the book and discussing some of your questions, if there are any questions left over. So if you've still got questions that you want to ask, please put them in the chat. There'll also be the opportunity to raise those with Women Ed Book Club as well. And there's also an event, a follow-up event that will come along. Sorry, I didn't give you a date for that. That was Sunday, the 11th of July, from 5 to 6. So details will be on Women Ed Book Chat. If you don't follow them, please do, because you'll get all the details from them. The second event is a follow-up event, which hopefully will tie in with Vivian's question earlier about how the book will enable people to be 10% braver. And the plan is to have a discussion about, possibly, hopefully with Julia getting involved, to talk about actually how people can get published and the steps they need to take if they're interested in amplifying their voice and writing and getting involved. So obviously we've got all our amazing opportunities, which you can find out. Just simply get in touch with Women Ed via our website, via our email, and find out about any of those events. They're open to anyone who is interested. But that event coming up in possibly towards the end of July, I want to say that at the moment, we'll go with that for the moment, but of course that will be shared via our networks. That event will focus on specific advice if you're interested in writing. So thank you again to everyone who's joined us this evening. Thank you to all our guests. Thank you to everyone who's showed up and all your wonderful comments in the chat. Thank you to the rest of the GSLs who've helped out today. And thank you, Samina. It has been an absolute honour and privilege to work with you organising this event. You know, you are profound, you are having a huge difference. And if people go out and buy this book, everyone who came along to this session went out and bought this book, the impact that would have on education in the UK is huge. So thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. And keep going with your questions if you still want to pop them in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Samina.
Thank you.
Congratulations. See you, Samina. See you.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you. Right. Thanks, Julia.
Yeah, thank you so much for facilitating that. It was yeah, wonderful event, and yeah, just so heartwarming. Honestly, I sort of feel like I need to go and emotionally recover now.
I know. Me too. It was so moving. Tasha, you started crying. I nearly started crying at that point as well.
Yeah.
And when Vivian came on, that was it. It was just
I
yeah.
know.
Sorry, I didn't realise you could hear me. Honestly, she's just amazing. I told you she was famous.
She is. She's just amazing, and the comments and the chat and everything are just wonderful, aren't they?
It just shows you she's just a lovely person, like everything else aside, you know. Just wow.
Palm still recording.
Oh, sorry. I shall stop.